Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it is something a little bit different than usual because in this video I'll be talking about this camera right here. It's the Holga 120N. Now this camera is a little bit of an interesting camera for me to talk about simply because part of it is more of like a toy camera, but it is also a real camera that actually takes real pictures, and also you actually load in the medium format film in here, the 120 film in here as well. And you know, a lot of the aspect of this camera actually functions like a proper camera, but also with the results of it and the way it feels and the way it operates, it's also a little bit of a contradiction in its own as well. So in this video I'll be discussing about my opinion, my experience, you know, using this camera, and also what I think about it and why I might recommend it, and actually why it might not actually be for you. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Holga 120N, now this camera has been out for quite a while now, and to be honest I have this camera for the past 9 years, but really only started using it the past 2 months simply because, well, I got back home here in Hanover, Germany, and it's where I actually stored this camera apparently. And also I found this camera and it was still in a pretty much good condition, and I thought why not try it out. And to be honest, I really had a lot of fun using this camera, but also a lot of frustrations using it as well. And of course I recently just published a photo shoot video using this camera with 2 expired black and white film, and yeah, it was actually originally the film that I bought together with this camera. And on one hand it does feel like a toy camera, but on the other hand, the way it operates, and because I still can use like 120 film with this camera, it also feels like a real camera in the same time. So throughout the whole shoot and throughout like every shoot I actually use this camera, whether it's just going out to do some normal street photography or just doing some photo shoot, it does feel like both a contradiction of photography camera and also just some sort of like toy camera. And I guess that's also part of the charm of this camera, and that's what makes it a little bit different than usual. And before I dive deeper into the video, let me also explain to you shortly the background of my analog system that I usually use, which this is the first one and this is the second one. So if you've watched a lot of my photo shoot videos, you'll know that for analog shoots, in most cases I like to use the Canon EOS 1, which is the the full frame film camera, and the other one is the Mamiya 645, which is the medium format camera. Now both of these are, well, some of you might prefer calling it real cameras, but the Holga is also technically a real camera. But these are more of like my workhorses, and yeah, they actually take a lot of beatings and I can actually program them to do whatever they want. So that's pretty much my background, is that the cameras that I use I actually have control over, and I've done videos about these 2 cameras and also many shoots with these 2 cameras as well. Whereas with the Holga, it's more of a camera where I feel like it has more control of me than I do of it, even though there's no computer in here, but because there's already like a preset shutter speed and only 2 aperture settings I could really choose, and also 2 different shutter speed settings that I can really shoot, I just feel like I'm just limited there. That being said, those limitations does come with a little bit of you know, refreshment in the mind. You know, like I can actually just use just very limited amount of settings and therefore open up a pretty much new world of creativity, or new field of creativity within those limitations that otherwise I might actually overlook. But before I go into that, let me first go into the 3 typical things I usually talk about in my thought videos on different cameras. And the first one is about the ergonomics and the usability, and then leading down into the image quality, and then leading down into my conclusion. Now let me first start with the ergonomics and the usability. The ergonomics and the usability of this camera, well, it does feel very plasticky, and to be honest, the way I use this camera, unlike many other Holga shooters, I actually don't seal out all these gaps in the cameras. I just find that, you know, if there's going to be light leaks and if there is some sort of quality control issues that, you know, would affect the image quality, I would like to actually experience all of them while using the actual camera, because the more I try to perfection it by sealing all these gaps and kind of leaks. Oh, and I also have some sort of a crack up here as well, because I don't know how it happened, but the build quality on this camera is very, very cheap. I just have it in my Wondered Provoke backpack, well, camera backpack. And to be honest, it was really nicely supported, and it wasn't really squished against any of my other cameras, so it was actually fairly well protected. But for some reason, there is that crack right there. But yeah, back to what I was saying is that, yeah, if there's any sort of flaw happening, whether it's light leaks or if there's some sort of like lens flare issues, things like that, then, you know, part of the charm of using this camera is just embracing the flaw of this camera, in my opinion, and I just leave it as it is. You know, if the shadow is going to be overexposed because of the light leaks or because of certain gaps not being completely sealed, I don't even seal the gap back here, well, the back window for the frame count, that is, you know, then let it be, things like that. And unlike many other copies that, you know, having the back open really easily even when it's locked, with my copy it's the other way around. Even when I unlock it, it's really, really hard to actually get it out. I really have to kind of like squeeze it out, and then yeah, it comes out. But while talking about squeezing it out, let me actually, well, it's really cheap plastic, by the way. Let me actually talk about what I really am scared of. The most is actually this back part here at the back of the camera. So when you load the film here, there's this kind of like this thing that holds the film in place when it rolls, and because there's no spring to it or anything, I feel like I could just break it at any time over the course of using this camera. And likewise for this as well, every time I squeeze this thing in or pulling it out, I feel like I could easily just break that little knob or that little kind of needle that's holding it in place. And if you look back in there, it's actually kind of like, let me actually set it to bulb, and if you can probably see, you know, yeah, it's open up like that, and it might look like you're actually looking through a glass, but it's actually you're looking through the front plastic lens elements rather. And the back of this lens is actually kind of like a small hole, almost pinhole-like, but a little bit bigger than pinhole, and that's just, you know, to accommodate the actual 120 film. But yeah, and I guess that's also explains the reason why the aperture starts at f8. There are actually two different aperture settings. One is f8 and one is f13. Well, equivalent to f13, because of the quality control, you can't really be so sure about the actual aperture settings. But yeah, so up here where you actually switch, you know, between different aperture, which is like the sun is rising behind the mountain or a full complete sunshine. So if there's complete sunshine, then it's going to be on a smaller aperture, or if, you know, the light is a bit gloomy, things like that, then you use the gloomy settings. Yeah, and also down here at the very bottom you have the N, and you have the B for bulb, and yeah, and also you have your metal, generously metal tripod mount screw on there. So yeah, that's actually pretty nice. But what's really frustrating for me is the actual lens focusing ring here, because it doesn't precisely say the actual focusing distance. I just find that, you know, there's a lot of room for error here to actually rotate this and, you know, guesstimate the actual length, like the focusing length. And I'm actually very good at guesstimating on how far my subject is away from me, but because I don't know the precise length on this lens, a lot of times it's just too much of a frustration in terms of guesstimating on roughly how far away these subject is. But, you know, I'm trying to keep it like the one person here should be around 3 feet, and of course you have the mountain here would be around infinity, so I always try to guesstimate there. So in between, if I get it wrong or somewhat wrong, then yeah, that's just pretty much tough luck on here. Another kind of funny point is this viewfinder. While I appreciate having this viewfinder or rangefinder, I wish that there would also be like a frame line, because I heard so many times that the actual viewfinder here is not as wide as the lens. For me, it's not about being as wide or as narrow or things like that, but for me it's, yeah, it's nowhere as close to, you know, exactly on what the lens is seeing, and that can be a bit frustrating. But that's also, you know, part of the fun as well, is not knowing completely what you're gonna get, whether through framing or through the actual images, because there could be light leaks, things like that. So yeah, there is that. But yeah, otherwise this camera is a very plain simple camera. You have this really nice well, if I can say nice, winder, because for the price it actually doesn't feel that cheap, but it does feel cheap compared to many other cameras. And yeah, the whole back here is just locked by these two things. So if you get a copy where the lock is actually very strong like mine, then you can be lucky, but a lot of times you might want to also tape it up at the very bottom here, because the back could just come off. Oh, by the way, the shutter here is on the side. So yeah, and at the back here, as I mentioned earlier, you actually find your window where you can actually switch between different kind of format of films and see how many shots you have left on the film. So yeah, there is that. There's not much to it. It's just a very bare bone camera. There's 2 shutter speed settings, 2 aperture settings, and focusing distance, things like that. Otherwise, yeah, if you want to control your film look, then that's just by changing the actual film itself to, you know, different color films, whether it's Kodak, Fujifilm, Lomo Gray, Agfa, Vista, Agfa, black and white, what have you. So yeah. Oh, and there's a cold shoe up here as well, which in my case, like, I find it actually quite nice, but I've never actually used it before, so well, on this particular camera. So yeah, there is that. But otherwise, yeah, it does feel very plasticky and also very light, but I think that because it is very light, it makes it a very nice camera to also actually just take it around town and just photograph here and there. And you know, because it's also very light, it's just a nice like refreshing to the mind every time, at least every time I use it, simply because every time I take it out and use this camera, it just feels like it's not a real camera where I can actually get serious about. So with all the shots, I can always try and explore so many different angles, and I'm actually, like, I feel like I draw less borderlines going out just to hold this camera, shooting with this camera, simply because of the design, the weight, the material that it uses, things like that. So yeah, it completely kind of changed the style, if I can say style, of my photography every time I use this camera. So yeah, but yeah, that's pretty much it for the ergonomics and the usability. You can see that I'm actually struggling a little bit, because usually I have a lot more to say about the camera, and in my head I just keep on asking myself, like, wait, is that it? Is that really it? Really? But yeah, now into the image quality. And usually when it comes to analog cameras, when I talk about the image quality, I always say, like, yeah, it's really about the lens in front, and also with the actual film roll inside, because the film roll determines, you know, the film look that you can get, and also the type of texture, the type of grains, the type of color composition, things like that. Well, not color composition, but color reproduction, things like that. So as the lens, the sharpness of the lens, and you know, the texture you get with different coatings of the lens, and so on and so forth. But with this camera, because the quality control is inconsistent at best, you're just kind of like playing lottery every time you actually come home with the image quality. It could be both good and bad in the same time, because you never know under which lighting condition it might benefit you and which lighting condition might not. And of course, the lens element here is not completely having the same consistency throughout. So I find personally with mine, there's definitely vignetting for sure, and the edges aren't that soft, or aren't that sharp. They're actually quite soft. But of course, with so many other users of this camera already kind of like explained on their videos, is that the consistency of softness, the consistency of vignetting is all very different, and I can actually confirm that with mine because, you know, my vignetting, as you can actually see from the image samples, are definitely there, very present, and but you've definitely have seen worse vignetting. For me, I think because it's a camera that I personally don't take too seriously, I really like the vignetting, and also some sort of like the softness that I get with this camera. It's just, it has this kind of like one of those documentary photography book that you buy, and it wasn't really shot by a professional documentary photographers or anything, but just documented by, you know, some sort of artist or some sort of let's say child or a person that has completely no interest in photography, but only just wanting to document, you know, those photographs back in the 30s, like 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, things like that. It does give me that kind of feel, strangely enough. So yeah, I personally just really like the images coming out of this, and yeah, it's just not really for a any professional reason, but just for the emotional side of things, of the feeling I get from looking at the images coming out of this camera. And of course, if I do show the images out of this camera to my normal friends, to my clients, they would definitely be like, David, what the heck are these images? It's so blurry, it's very grainy, it looks like one of those older Instagram filters, things like that. But to me, because I know it's coming from film, and because I've shot and actually processed them myself with the film and everything, I definitely appreciate the look of it and appreciate the character that I get with this camera. Of course, being a very dark camera in terms of like the aperture wise, you're not going to be taking this camera into low lighting situations, though you can, and using longer aperture settings, of course. But in the same time, yeah, it's a camera that you do expect a lot of blur, whether it's motion blur because of the very dark aperture value, or it's just, yeah, very blurry because the shutter speed isn't really fast enough to always capture a lot of the action out there. But yeah, otherwise the image quality has a very nice character to it, and with different Holga that you actually put your hands on and play with them, despite having the same model number, they'll all be very different. Whether it's like the actual body construction that has different light leaks characteristics, or different lenses that has different point of sharpness and different softness level on the corners, on the edges, different vignetting level, I find that, you know, it's something that you can actually very much experiment on and actually appreciate if that's something that you would like to do. And to be honest, for the price, it's also a very nice price point to get into 120 film as well. So yeah, that's pretty much for the image quality. I personally like it. Yes, I was very frustrated by it in the very beginning, but you know, after enjoying using this camera and also seeing what it is to me, what it means to me, I pretty much just, you know, came to terms with it and ending up really liking the images. Of course, I'm not going to be really comparing the images to these cameras simply because, well, it's completely different beast of cameras. And of course, if you watch a lot of my digital photo shoots, I tend to use these as well, the R5, the GFX 50R, things like that, and the 1DX and so on and so forth. But you know, this is a completely different type of camera on its own, and I really appreciate it. And to conclude everything overall, I just would like to actually recommend to those people who would like to try 120 film, knowing that, you know, this camera has a lot of perks and flaws and a lot of fun in the same time. And yeah, if you just want to kind of like just go out there, experiment, just, you know, have fun, get lost, things like that. And, you know, I guess the best kind of scenario I can come up with is, you know, one of those like surprise bags you get in like malls, especially on special events like New Year, things like that, where you have a lot of mystery bags that you buy, you don't know what it is, you just know that in the bag it's definitely worth 10 times or at least 5 times more than the actual value of the bag itself. and then you actually just wait until you're home and open the bag after buying it, of course. It's pretty much similar to this camera. Even though you think you are used to, you know, how the characteristics of this camera might turn out, things like that, you will always be surprised at certain situations or at certain scenarios where you come back home and after developing your film, you're like, oh, there's that kind of flare that I haven't seen before, or oh, there's that kind of texture that I haven't seen before out of this camera. So if you love to experiment, if you love to just, you know, go easy and not think too much about the technicality of this camera and just, you know, let loose of yourself, explore and experiment, then this camera is really for you. But if you're a type that, you know, like really expect a lot of the results to be very clean, very clinical, very professional looking, things like that, then of course then this camera is not for you. But even then I would still recommend you experiment with this one, even though you might be clinical, kind of image quality person, things like that, because it really freshened up your mind a little bit, or actually quite a bit, when using this camera out there in the field. So yeah, this is again one of the shortest my thought video on a camera, and I hope you can actually gain something from this video. If you need a free photography guidebook, it's absolutely for free on my website. Just click the link the link is down in the description section below. If you have anything to share, any suggestions, any stories, things like that, also feel free to just comment down in the comment section below as well. So yeah, that's it for this video. I thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.